The morning mist hung thick over Ravenshollow Castle as Sir Edmund Blackthorne made his rounds through the stone corridors. As the most trusted guard of King William's court, Edmund had served the royal family for nearly 2 decades, witnessing the rise and fall of nobles, the birth of heirs, and the endless political schemes that plagued every royal house. On this particular autumn morning in 1387, something felt different. The servants whispered more quietly than usual, their eyes darting nervously as they went about their duties. Even the kitchen maids, typically full of gossip and laughter, worked in unusual silence. Edmund's instincts, honed by years of protecting the crown, told him that trouble was brewing within the castle walls. Princess Isabella, the king's beloved 12-year-old daughter, had been acting strangely for weeks. Once a bright and cheerful child who would run through the halls with her pet spaniel, she now kept to her chambers, emerging only for meals where she sat in sullen silence. Her governess, Lady Margaret, had mentioned to Edmund that the princess seemed frightened of something, but whenever pressed for details, the child would simply shake her head and retreat further into herself. The source of this change, Edmund suspected, lay with Queen Constance, the king's second wife. Constance had married King William 3 years after his first wife's death, bringing with her ambitions that extended far beyond mere companionship. She had quickly established herself as a formidable presence in court, surrounding herself with loyal supporters and making it clear that she intended to secure her own position and that of any future children she might bear. As Edmund walked past the Queen's private solar, he heard raised voices coming from within. This was unusual, as Queen Constance typically conducted her affairs with calculated calm, never allowing emotion to color her public demeanor. Something had clearly disturbed her usual composure. Edmund paused, his duty as protector of the royal family compelling him to listen carefully to what might be a threat to the crown. Through the heavy oak door, he could hear Queen Constance speaking in sharp, urgent tones to someone Edmund couldn't identify. Her words were muffled, but her tone was unmistakably one of command and frustration. Edmund moved closer to the door, positioning himself where he could hear more clearly, while maintaining the appearance of simply standing guard. What he heard next made his blood run cold, and his hand instinctively moved to the hilt of his sword. Queen Constance was not simply discussing court matters or planning social events. She was orchestrating something far more sinister, something that directly threatened the safety and well-being of Princess Isabella. The conversation revealed a plot that, if successful, would forever change the line of succession and place the innocent princess in grave danger. Edmund's mind raced as he processed what he was hearing. His loyalty to the crown demanded action, but he also knew that Queen Constance wielded considerable power and influence. Any move against her would need to be carefully planned and executed with precision. One wrong step could not only cost him his position but potentially his life, while leaving Princess Isabella vulnerable to whatever fate the Queen had planned for her. The conversation inside the solar continued, and Edmund realized he was witnessing something that few in the kingdom would ever believe. Queen Constance, who presented herself as a devoted stepmother and loyal wife, was revealing her true nature and intentions. The mask of maternal care she had worn so convincingly was finally slipping, exposing the calculating and ruthless woman beneath. As the voices grew louder, Edmund made a decision that would change everything. He would not stand by and allow harm to come to Princess Isabella, regardless of the consequences to himself. But he also knew that he would need evidence, allies, and a plan that could outmaneuver one of the most cunning women in the kingdom. The game of royal politics was about to become deadly serious, and Edmund found himself at the center of a conspiracy that threatened to tear the royal family apart. Edmund pressed his ear closer to the door, his heart pounding as Queen Constance's voice became clearer. She was speaking to Lord Aldrich Voss, a nobleman who had recently arrived at court claiming to seek trade agreements with neighboring kingdoms. Edmund had always been suspicious of Voss, noting how the man seemed more interested in observing the royal family's routines than in conducting any legitimate business. The princess must be removed from court before the harvest festival, Queen Constance was saying, her voice cold and calculating. My own pregnancy will be announced within days, and I cannot have William's attention divided between his heir and his current daughter. Isabella's very existence threatens everything we have worked toward. Edmund's grip tightened on his sword hilt. The Queen was with child, and she saw Princess Isabella as an obstacle to her unborn baby's claim to the throne. In the complex world of royal succession, a king's legitimate daughter held significant power, especially one as beloved by the people as Princess Isabella had become. Lord Voss responded in hushed tones that Edmund strained to hear. "The convent of St. Agatha would accept her, Your Majesty. Once she takes vows as a novice, she would be removed from succession permanently. The king need never know it was anything more than the princess's own religious calling. And if she refuses?" Queen Constance asked, her voice carrying a threatening edge that made Edmund's skin crawl. "There are other convents," Voss replied smoothly. "Some much farther from the kingdom where communication with the outside world is limited. A tragic accident during travel could also be arranged if necessary." Edmund felt sick. They were discussing either forcing Princess Isabella into a religious life she had never wanted, or potentially arranging her death. The innocent child who had once brought joy to the entire castle was being treated like a political problem to be eliminated. Edmund knew he had heard enough, but as he prepared to move away from the door, Queen Constance spoke again. "There is one more complication," she continued. "That guard, Edmund Blackthorne, he watches everything, and Isabella trusts him completely. She might try to seek his help, and he has the king's ear. We cannot proceed while he remains suspicious of our intentions." Edmund's blood ran cold. Not only was Princess Isabella in danger, but Queen Constance had identified him as a threat to her plans. He realized that his own life might be forfeit if he didn't act quickly and carefully. Lord Voss chuckled darkly. "Sir Edmund has served faithfully, but even the most loyal servants can meet with unfortunate accidents. A fall from the castle walls during night patrol, perhaps, or a hunting mishap when next the court rides out." The casual way they discussed his murder filled Edmund with a cold rage, but he forced himself to remain calm and think strategically. He needed to warn Princess Isabella and find a way to expose the Queen's plot. But he also had to protect himself long enough to see justice done. As the conversation inside continued, Edmund learned more disturbing details. Queen Constance had been slowly poisoning the king's mind against other potential allies at court, suggesting that various nobles were becoming too ambitious or disloyal. She had been systematically isolating anyone who might oppose her plans, creating a network of supporters who owed their positions to her favor. The Harvest Festival, just 10 days away, was to be the moment when everything would be set in motion. During the celebration, when the court's attention would be focused on festivities and entertainment, Princess Isabella would mysteriously disappear. A carefully forged letter would be left behind, supposedly written by the princess herself, explaining her sudden calling to religious life and her decision to leave court forever. Edmund realized that Queen Constance's plan was diabolically clever. By the time anyone realized what had truly happened, Isabella would be long gone, and any attempt to retrieve her could be portrayed as interference with her religious devotion. The Queen would appear to be the grieving stepmother, supporting her husband through the loss of his daughter while preparing to give him a new heir. But Edmund had one advantage that Queen Constance didn't know about. Princess Isabella had been coming to him with her fears and concerns for weeks, sensing that something was wrong but not understanding what. She trusted him completely, and she had even mentioned strange dreams about being taken away from her father. The child's instincts had been warning her of the danger that surrounded her. As the voices inside the solar began to fade, indicating that the meeting was ending, Edmund quickly moved away from the door and positioned himself at his usual guard post. His mind was already working on a plan that would need to be executed with perfect timing and absolute secrecy. He had 10 days to save Princess Isabella's life and expose Queen Constance's treachery. But first, he needed to survive long enough to put his plan into action. The game of royal politics had just become a matter of life and death, and Edmund was determined that innocence would triumph over ambition, no matter the cost to himself. That evening, Edmund waited until the castle settled into its nightly rhythm before making his move. He knew that Princess Isabella often read by candlelight in her chamber long after her governess had retired, and tonight, he needed to speak with her privately. The corridors were dimly lit by torches, casting dancing shadows that seemed to mirror his own anxious thoughts. He approached Isabella's chamber carefully, listening for any signs that she might have visitors or that Lady Margaret might still be awake. Satisfied that the princess was alone, he knocked gently on her door using a pattern they had established years ago when she was younger, and sometimes had nightmares. "Sir Edmund," came Isabella's soft voice from within. "Yes, Your Highness. I need to speak with you about something very important." The door opened to reveal Princess Isabella in her nightgown and robe, her long, dark hair braided for sleep. Despite being only 12, her eyes held an intelligence and maturity that had always impressed Edmund. She had inherited her father's keen mind and her late mother's gentle nature. "I knew you would come," Isabella said quietly, gesturing for him to enter. "I've been having the most terrible dreams again. And today I overheard 2 kitchen maids talking about how Queen Constance has been asking strange questions about convents and holy orders." Edmund's heart ached for the child, who was being forced to grow up too, quickly in the dangerous world of royal politics. He closed the door behind him and knelt down so he could look directly into her eyes. "Princess, what I'm about to tell you will be frightening, but I need you to be as brave as I know you can be. Your stepmother is planning to remove you from court permanently, and your life may be in danger." Isabella's face paled, but she didn't cry or panic as many children her age might have. Instead, she nodded gravely and sat down in her reading chair. "I thought it might be something like that. She's been different lately, asking me about my prayers and whether I've ever thought about dedicating my life to God. But I want to stay here with Papa and learn to help rule the kingdom someday." Edmund felt a surge of pride at her courage. "That's exactly what we're going to make sure happens. But we need to be very clever about it, and we need help from people we can trust completely." Over the next hour, Edmund explained everything he had overheard, carefully avoiding the most frightening details about the threats to both their lives. Isabella listened intently, asking intelligent questions and helping Edmund refine the plan that was forming in his mind. "We need evidence that people will believe," Isabella said thoughtfully. "Queen Constance is very clever about appearing innocent. Even if I told Papa what you heard, she could claim you were lying or that I misunderstood something." Edmund nodded approvingly. The princess was thinking like a true strategist. That's why we need to catch her in the act, or find proof of her intentions that even she cannot deny. Together, they developed a plan that would require careful timing and considerable risk. Isabella would pretend to be more receptive to Queen Constance's suggestions about religious life, making the queen believe her plan was working smoothly. Meanwhile, Edmund would work to gather evidence of the plot, possibly even getting Lord Voss to incriminate himself. "There's something else," Isabella said hesitantly. "Brother Thomas, the castle chaplain, has been coming to see me more often lately. He keeps talking about how wonderful convent life can be for young women who want to serve God. I think Queen Constance has been using him to prepare me for what she has planned." This revelation gave Edmund another idea. Brother Thomas was a good man, but he was also naive and easily manipulated. If they could make him understand what was really happening, he might become an ally rather than an unwitting accomplice. As they continued planning, Isabella proved to be surprisingly resourceful. She suggested using her pet spaniel, Duchess, to carry messages between them if they needed to communicate without being seen together. She also knew of secret passages within the castle walls that had been built during earlier conflicts. Passages that even Queen Constance probably didn't know about. "There's one more thing we need to consider," Edmund said carefully. "If this plan fails, if we're discovered before we can expose the truth, you may need to leave the castle quickly. I want you to be prepared for that possibility." Isabella's composure finally wavered slightly. "Where would I go? Everyone I love is here. Your mother's sister, Lady Catherine, lives in the northern provinces. She's married to Lord Robert of Blackmore, and they've always been loyal to your father. If necessary, they would protect you until the truth could be revealed." The princess nodded, understanding the gravity of what they were discussing. "How long do we have?" 10 days until the harvest festival. That's when Queen Constance plans to act." As Edmund prepared to leave, Isabella caught his arm. "Sir Edmund, why are you risking so much for me?" "If Queen Constance discovers what you're doing..." Edmund smiled at the brave young girl who reminded him so much of her beloved mother. "Because protecting you isn't just my duty, princess. It's my honor. Your mother made me promise to watch over you before she died, and I intend to keep that promise no matter what happens." With their plan set in motion, Edmund left Isabella's chamber feeling both hopeful and terrified. They had 10 days to outmaneuver one of the most cunning women in the kingdom, and failure would mean not just their own deaths, but the loss of the rightful heir to the throne. The next few days would test every skill Edmund had learned in 20 years of service to the crown. The next morning brought unexpected complications. Edmund arrived at his usual post to find that Lord Aldrich Voss had requested a private hunting expedition with several of the castle's guards, including Edmund himself. The invitation was phrased as an honor, but Edmund recognized it for what it truly was, an opportunity for an accident to befall him far from the castle walls. Edmund knew he couldn't refuse without raising suspicion, but accepting meant walking directly into a trap. He needed to find a way to turn this dangerous situation to his advantage while staying alive long enough to protect Princess Isabella. Before departing for the hunt, Edmund managed to speak briefly with Brother Thomas in the chapel. The elderly chaplain was kneeling before the altar, deep in prayer, and looked up with surprise when Edmund approached. "Sir Edmund, I wasn't expecting to see you here this morning. Shouldn't you be preparing for Lord Voss's hunting party?" "Brother Thomas, I need to ask you something, and I pray you'll answer me honestly. Has Queen Constance spoken to you about Princess Isabella's future?" The chaplain's face immediately became guarded, confirming Edmund's suspicions. "The Queen has expressed concerns about the princess's spiritual development. Why do you ask?" Edmund chose his words carefully. "Have you noticed any changes in the princess lately? She seems troubled, even frightened at times." Brother Thomas's expression softened with genuine concern. "I have noticed that she seems less joyful than before. When I speak to her about the peace and purpose that can be found in religious life, she becomes very quiet and withdrawn. I assumed she was simply contemplating her future." "Brother, what if I told you that the princess's spiritual calling might not be as voluntary as it appears? What if she's being pressured into a life she doesn't want?" The old chaplain's eyes widened with shock and growing understanding. "You're suggesting that Queen Constance is, but surely not. The Queen has only the princess's best interests at heart." Edmund could see that Brother Thomas was beginning to question what he had previously accepted without doubt. "I'm asking you to watch and listen more carefully, and if something happens to me during today's hunt, I need you to protect Princess Isabella. Can you promise me that?" Before Brother Thomas could respond, Lord Voss appeared in the chapel doorway, his smile not reaching his cold eyes. "Sir Edmund, we've been looking for you everywhere. The hunting party is ready to depart." As they rode out from the castle, Edmund studied the terrain carefully, looking for opportunities to survive what he was certain would be an attempt on his life. The hunting party consisted of Lord Voss, 2 guards whom Edmund didn't know well, and a tracker who seemed nervous and avoided eye contact. They rode deep into the forest, ostensibly following the trail of a large stag that had been spotted near the river. But Edmund noticed that they were heading toward a particularly remote area where the trees grew thick and the paths were treacherous. It would be the perfect place for an accident to occur. As they dismounted to track their quarry on foot, Lord Voss began making casual conversation about court life and the upcoming harvest festival. His questions seemed innocent enough, but Edmund could hear the underlying purpose. Voss was trying to determine how much Edmund knew about the plot against Princess Isabella. "The princess has seemed quite serious lately," Voss remarked as they walked through the dense undergrowth. "Queen Constance mentioned that Isabella has been showing interest in religious devotion. Perhaps she takes after her saintly mother in that regard." Edmund kept his expression neutral. "Princess Isabella is indeed a thoughtful young woman. She considers all aspects of life carefully before making decisions. Of course, young people sometimes need guidance in making such important choices," Voss continued, "especially when those choices affect not just themselves, but the stability of the realm." The veiled threat in those words confirmed Edmund's suspicions. As they approached a steep ravine where the river curved sharply below, Edmund prepared himself for whatever attack might come. But instead of an immediate assault, something unexpected happened. The nervous tracker suddenly broke away from the group and began running back toward the castle. Lord Voss cursed and ordered the 2 guards to pursue him, leaving himself alone with Edmund near the dangerous cliff edge. "It seems our tracker has lost his nerve," Voss said, drawing his sword. But perhaps that's for the best. This conversation was always meant to be private. Edmund drew his own weapon, grateful for the years of training that had kept his skills sharp. Lord Voss, I think there's been some misunderstanding about my loyalties. Voss laughed coldly. Oh, I understand your loyalties perfectly, Sir Edmund. The question is whether you understand the futility of opposing forces much larger than yourself. As steel rang against steel in the forest clearing, Edmund realized that his survival depended not just on his sword arm, but on his ability to defeat Voss quickly enough to return to the castle before Queen Constance could act against Princess Isabella. The hunt had become a deadly game with the highest possible stakes. The two men fought with the skill of trained warriors, but Edmund had advantages that Voss had underestimated. Edmund knew these woods intimately from years of patrol, and his motivation to protect Princess Isabella gave him strength that mere ambition could not match. As their battle raged near the cliff's edge, Edmund began to gain the upper hand, forcing Voss backward toward the treacherous drop. But Voss had one final surprise, a hidden dagger that he produced with desperate speed, aiming directly for Edmund's heart. Edmund twisted away from Voss's dagger thrust just in time, the blade slicing through his doublet but missing flesh by mere inches. Using his opponent's forward momentum against him, Edmund grabbed Voss's wrist and pivoted, sending the lord stumbling toward the cliff edge. Voss managed to catch himself at the last moment, but his precarious position gave Edmund the opening he needed. With a swift blow from the pommel of his sword, Edmund struck Voss unconscious, leaving the conspirator alive but helpless near the ravine's edge. Edmund quickly bound Voss with rope from his hunting pack, ensuring the man wouldn't escape when he regained consciousness. But as he prepared to head back to the castle, he heard the sound of approaching horses. The two guards who had chased the fleeing tracker were returning, and Edmund realized he was still in grave danger. Thinking quickly, Edmund dragged the unconscious Voss to a hidden position among the rocks and concealed himself nearby. When the guards arrived at the clearing, they found only signs of a struggle and bloodstains on the ground. Edmund had deliberately cut his hand to leave evidence of violence. "Where are they?" one guard asked nervously, looking around the empty clearing. "Must have gone over the cliff," the other replied. "Look at all this blood. We should return to the castle and report that both men fell during their fight." As the guards departed to deliver their false report, Edmund waited to ensure they were truly gone before retrieving the bound and now conscious Lord Voss. The nobleman's eyes blazed with fury and fear as Edmund approached. "You've accomplished nothing," Voss snarled. "Queen Constance's plan will proceed whether I return or not. By tomorrow night, Princess Isabella will be gone from court forever." Edmund's blood ran cold. "Tomorrow night? But the harvest festival isn't for another week." Voss smiled cruelly despite his helpless position. The festival was always a deception. The queen moved up the timeline after she became suspicious that someone might be working against her. Even now, preparations are being made for the princess's departure. Edmund realized he had been outmaneuvered. While he had been focused on the public timeline Queen Constance had discussed, she had been planning to act much sooner. He needed to return to the castle immediately, but first he had to deal with Voss. "You're going to help me stop this," Edmund told his prisoner. "I would rather die," Voss replied defiantly. "That can be arranged," Edmund said coldly. "But I'd prefer you live long enough to confess your crimes to King William. However, if you force my hand..." Edmund's threat had the desired effect. Voss's defiance crumbled as he realized that Edmund was prepared to do whatever necessary to protect Princess Isabella. After several minutes of tense negotiation, Voss agreed to help expose Queen Constance's plot in exchange for his life. Together, they made their way back toward the castle through hidden forest paths that Edmund knew would keep them concealed from the main roads. As they traveled, Voss revealed more details of the conspiracy, including the names of other nobles who had been recruited to support Queen Constance's ambitions. "The queen has been planning this for months," Voss admitted. She knew that once she announced her pregnancy, she would need to eliminate any threats to her child's inheritance. Princess Isabella was the obvious obstacle, but there are others she considers dangerous as well. When they finally reached the castle as darkness was falling, Edmund was horrified to discover that his supposed death had already been reported. Queen Constance had wasted no time in using the news to her advantage. consoling King William over the loss of his faithful guard while simultaneously suggesting that Princess Isabella needed extra protection during this difficult time. Edmund realized that the Queen had positioned herself perfectly. With him presumed dead, she could move against Isabella without fear of interference, and her show of concern for the princess's safety would deflect any suspicion about her true intentions. Using the secret passages that Isabella had told him about, Edmund made his way through the castle walls to a vantage point where he could observe the royal family's private quarters. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. Queen Constance was already implementing her plan. Brother Thomas was in the princess's chamber, speaking earnestly with Isabella about the peace and purpose she could find in religious life. But this time his words carried more urgency, and Edmund could see that Isabella was being pressured to make an immediate decision about her future. "The Queen believes it would be best for you to leave tonight," Brother Thomas was saying. "The shock of Sir Edmund's death has upset the entire court, and perhaps some time in quiet contemplation would help you process this tragedy." Isabella's face was pale but determined as she responded, "Brother Thomas, I appreciate Queen Constance's concern, but I would prefer to remain here with my father during this difficult time. Surely he needs my support now more than ever." Edmund felt a surge of pride at the princess's courage and intelligence. Despite the pressure she was facing, she was holding firm to their plan and refusing to be manipulated into leaving voluntarily. But Edmund knew that Queen Constance wouldn't accept this refusal. If Isabella wouldn't leave willingly, the Queen would find another way to remove her from court. Edmund had to act quickly, but he also needed to gather more evidence that would convince King William of his wife's treachery. The game had reached its most dangerous phase, and Edmund realized that the next few hours would determine not just Isabella's fate, but the future of the entire kingdom. As midnight approached, Edmund watched from the shadows as Queen Constance's plan reached its final stage. Unable to convince Princess Isabella to leave voluntarily, the Queen had resorted to more desperate measures. Edmund observed as several unfamiliar men in religious robes entered the castle through a side entrance, accompanied by what appeared to be an elderly abbess. Edmund realized these were not legitimate religious figures, but hired accomplices who would help create the illusion that Isabella had chosen to enter a convent. Once they spirited her away from the castle, she would disappear forever, and Queen Constance's path to securing her unborn child's inheritance would be clear. Moving through the secret passages, Edmund positioned himself where he could hear Queen Constance speaking with the false abbess in her private solar. The conversation confirmed his worst fears about the princess's intended fate. "The girl has refused to cooperate," Queen Constance was saying, her voice tight with frustration. "You'll need to use the sleeping draught in her evening wine. Once she's unconscious, you can remove her from the castle and claim she came willingly. And if she awakens during transport?" the false abbess asked in a gravelly voice that Edmund now realized belonged to a man in disguise. "Then you use whatever force is necessary to keep her quiet," Queen Constance replied coldly. "Once you reach the remote location I've arranged, it won't matter what she claims. No one will believe the ravings of a disturbed young woman who has clearly been affected by grief and trauma." Edmund had heard enough. It was time to set his own plan in motion, using the evidence he had gathered and the prisoner he had secured in Lord Voss. But first, he needed to warn Princess Isabella and ensure her immediate safety. Using their prearranged signal, Edmund alerted Isabella to his presence outside her chamber. When she opened the door, her relief at seeing him alive was obvious, though she quickly composed herself. "Sir Edmund, they told us you were dead. I've been so frightened, but I remembered what you said about being brave. You've done wonderfully, Princess, but we need to act now. Queen Constance plans to drug your wine tonight and remove you from the castle while you're unconscious." Isabella's eyes widened with fear, but she nodded determinedly. "What do we do?" Edmund quickly explained his plan. Isabella would pretend to drink the drugged wine, but would actually pour it into a plant pot when no one was looking. When the conspirators came to collect her unconscious form, they would instead find Edmund waiting for them, having taken her place in the darkened room. Meanwhile, Isabella would use the secret passages to make her way to her father's chambers, where Edmund had arranged for Lord Voss to be waiting with his confession already written out. The combination of Voss's testimony and catching the conspirators in the act would provide irrefutable proof of Queen Constance's treachery. As they put their plan into action, Edmund felt the weight of 20 years of loyal service driving him forward. This was what he had trained for, what he had sworn to do when he first took his oath to protect the royal family. The evening proceeded exactly as they had anticipated. Isabella successfully avoided drinking the drugged wine, and when the false religious figures crept into her chamber near midnight, they found Edmund waiting for them instead of an unconscious princess. "Looking for someone?" Edmund asked calmly as he lit a candle, revealing his presence to the startled conspirators. The false abbess reached for a concealed weapon, but Edmund was faster. Within moments, he had subdued both intruders and secured them with rope. Just as he finished, King William burst into the chamber, having been awakened by Princess Isabella with news of the plot against her life. "Father," Isabella called from behind the king, her voice filled with relief and joy. King William's face was a mask of fury and heartbreak as he surveyed the scene before him. The evidence of his wife's betrayal was undeniable. The drugged wine, the hired conspirators, and most damning of all, Lord Voss's detailed confession of the entire plot. "Where is Queen Constance?" the king demanded, his voice shaking with rage. "Waiting in her solar for news of the princess's successful removal," Edmund replied. "She believes her plan has succeeded." What followed was a confrontation that would be remembered in the kingdom's history for generations. Queen Constance, summoned to explain herself, initially tried to maintain her innocence, claiming that Edmund had fabricated evidence against her. But when confronted with Lord Voss's confession and the testimony of her hired accomplices, her composure finally cracked. "You foolish man," she screamed at King William. "That girl threatens everything. My child will be the true heir, the one who will bring strength to this kingdom instead of the weakness her mother's bloodline represents." Her words sealed her fate. By sunrise, Queen Constance was confined to the tower to await trial, her pregnancy offering her no protection from the consequences of her attempted murder of the king's daughter. Princess Isabella, safe in her father's protective embrace, looked up at Edmund with tears of gratitude in her eyes. "You saved my life, Sir Edmund. How can I ever repay you?" Edmund knelt before the princess and her father, his heart full of pride and relief. "Your safety is all the payment I could ever want, Your Highness. It has been my honor to serve." King William placed his hand on Edmund's shoulder, his voice thick with emotion. "Sir Edmund Blackthorne, you have shown loyalty beyond measure. From this day forward, you shall be not just a guard but a knight of the realm, with lands and title to match your courage." As dawn broke over Ravenshollow Castle, the kingdom was safe once again. Princess Isabella would grow up to become a wise and beloved queen, and Sir Edmund would serve as her most trusted advisor for many years to come. The plot that had threatened to destroy the royal line had instead revealed the unbreakable bonds of loyalty, courage, and love that truly made a kingdom strong. Queen Constance's child was born in prison and raised by distant relatives, far from court and any claim to power. Justice had prevailed, and the innocent had been protected by those brave enough to stand against corruption and greed, no matter the personal cost.